Let's take these 3 Pixar movies and Google Translate them into horror. So I type Finding Nemo into Google Translate and run it 100 times, and this is what comes back. I don't need anything. Well, damn, how about some damn gratitude, eh? And based on the translations, I will horrify these Pixar movies, and what I did to Hoppers at the end is just unacceptable. Anyways, let's get into it. I start with the background and then drag in Marlin, who is looking absolutely terrified, and once we have him in place, I'll bring in Nemo, except this time he's angry, as if Marlin was the one who disappeared. I think you can already tell that this isn't going to end well for somebody, so let's create a demonic mouth shape for Nemo and paint in some genuinely sinister teeth, and I'll also add shadows so it feels integrated right away. Then I shift the mouth slightly to the left since it was sitting a little out of perspective. After that, I'll paint in highlights around it, build out the eyes and shade them in. Now, Nemo already looks a lot more demonic and we've barely started. Anyways, I create my own shape for the tail with the pointed end aimed directly at Marlin, kind of like he's holding him at gunpoint. Then I'll give it Nemo's base orange color and add shading and highlights. I erase some of Nemo's original fins because while we're adding demonic elements, we're getting rid of the innocent ones. I want the tail to carry the same pattern as an actual goldfish, so I paint in that white bluish tone along with the darker charcoal strokes around it. Otherwise, it just doesn't read as genuinely part of him. I'll also get rid of the fin on top of his head too because I've got plans for that. So I drag in an image and grab just the horn from it and integrate it into his forehead. Then I'll add shadows and reshape it slightly so it actually looks like it's growing out of him. Man, no father who's looking for his son deserves this. Anyways, I add highlights around it to sell the protrusion and then add 2 more horns behind it going back like a mohawk and then shade him accordingly. After that, I add in a texture that matches the rest of Nemo and Marlin's design just to keep it cohesive. Now it's time for the damage. I add blood to the scene starting with the tail because Marlin spent this entire movie looking for his son and he finally found him. Then I build a shape on top of Marlin which becomes a large cut across his body from Nemo's tail. And if you don't want to be damaged by the demonic Nemo, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you. Anyways, then I'll warp it into perspective and bring in an image of the actual inside of a fish and integrate it into the wound. Go grab a seat because we're about to get busy. Now, with the right blend mode, it settles in with the dark red underneath and then I start layering in shadows. Obviously, this just happened, so I add blood around the edges of the incision, plus some dripping down on his face since the top of his body is torn open, and I'll also add a few more drips along the sides. Back to Nemo, who probably nobody would expect to be capable of this, knowing how innocent he is in the actual movie. Anyways, let me add blood to the teeth and then around the outside of the mouth using warp to follow the shape of his face. The blood on the teeth came out a little heavy, so I go back and paint it in by hand instead. I add shadows underneath both of them, starting with Marlin and then do the same for Nemo. At this point, I felt like there wasn't enough blood, which is an occurring thing as of lately. So I grab a brush from my own brush pack and start adding spatter. Once I'm happy with that, I add a puddle underneath them on the table because there's clearly a lot of bleeding going on here. Then I'll add in some highlights and proper shading across both of them so they feel consistent with where the light is coming from. Finally, I'll bring in the text and finish it off with a camera raw filter, and just when you think I'm done, I'll add one last detail, a bit of highlight in Nemo's eyes. And that's when I don't need anything actually starts to make sense. Marlin spends the whole movie thinking his son needs saving and he finally finds him and Nemo doesn't need anything from him at all. Besides apparently for him to become his victim. Anyways, here's the horror version of Finding Nemo where he's better off left alone. We still have Up and Hoppers coming up next, but let's move on to Up. So let's type Up into Google Translate and run it 100 times, and this one comes back with, "Is that you?" Yes, Google, it's me. Now, in the actual movie, Ellie dies, and the guys left devastated. In this version, that part still happens, except she comes back and you would want to see how this story unfolds. So, we start with the background, which is their living room, and then I add in a chair, and no, it is not for somebody to sit in. I fix the perspective on it first, and then I'll add shading underneath and some contact shadow around the feet. Then I bring in the guy. In the original poster, he is hanging from a garden hose. I don't need the hose itself here, just the cable, so let's erase that. I also need both his arms hanging down instead of raised like the original. Let me just extend the cable a few times and puppet warp it to wrap it around his neck, and then I'll erase parts so it sits properly around his throat. After that, I go back and fix a couple of mistakes on that duplicated arm and remove a flip patch that got left behind. After adding some shading to the cable, I desaturate the background and the couch a bit just to tie everything together. Now, Ellie Ali comes into play, and I promise you, you do not want to play with Ali. I clone stamp out her original mouth and bring in a new one with a more angry expression. Whoa. Then I do the same on her eyes to make room for a different look. The new eyes came in with the wrong color, since she's supposed to have green, so I paint that back in. I take an image of a skull and grab just a piece of the mouth and jaw, which is going to be visible on the left side of her face. I add shading so the cut open section overlaps her real skin, and then I pull the skull back into proportion. After that, I cut away more of the surrounding skin and then I desaturate her overall, since she is not exactly among the living anymore. Then I line up the mouth properly with the skull, and then it is time for blood. I start by adding it onto the skull, and with the help of Blend If, I'll bring some highlights back. Then I draw blood dripping down from it, and also blood still clinging to the skin, which is gruesome to say the least. Anyways, I add blood along the wound edges and more coming from her mouth. And then I draw in eyelashes, and I still don't understand what the purpose of that is, but whatever. Then I add blood under her nose, and with the use of my own brush pack, I paint in eye veins. Oh, and also more blood under the eyes. Now it's time to bring back the guy and place Ali behind him, resizing her so the scale makes sense. Then I'll add shading underneath so she feels grounded, which honestly doesn't matter because floating in this case would have been okay too. Anyways, then I'll paint in some shadows cast onto her from the chair, and then I'll go back and shade the chair itself, since there's a lot of shadow coming off the guy, just hanging there, which will make sense in a bit. Then I blur the background to push focus onto the characters, but I do have to paint back some sharpness in the front, otherwise it'll look off. Then I'll shift the guy's face to a purple tone, sample his skin, build out the eyelids and give those the proper shading. To end the guy's suffering, I'll add blood to his mouth and go back to Ali. I'll give Ali a glitch texture and adjust the blending mode. Then I'll paint in smoke on the floor and split her across different layers by body part and offset the placement slightly to push the glitch effect even further. And lastly, let's bring in the up logo, apply the same glitch effect to it and finish everything with a camera raw filter. And this is the horror version of up if the guy's last words were, "Ali, is that you?" Now before we go to the last one, if you're a graphic designer or you're just getting into it, I've put together a hub where you can find free brush packs, overlays, textures and way more. So if that's interesting to you, scan the QR code on the screen or click the link in the description to check it out. Alright, now for the last one. Get on the edge of your seats because it's about to get horrific. Let's type hoppers into Google Translate and run it 100 times, and this one comes back with, "This is garbage." Wow, Google definitely did not leave a good rating on this movie. Now, someone heard Disney was making a movie called Hoppers. They found out what it was actually about and how they were planning to film it. Their reaction was simply, "This is garbage." So they did everything in their power to stop it from happening. So let's start by bringing in a garbage bag. Then I get rid of the original text on it, and something bad has already happened to Hoppers here since his head is severed and sitting on the floor. Then I'll find a separate image of Hoppers where he's screaming and terrified, so I take just the shape of his mouth from it since I want this version to look scared too. Then I use that mouth and clean up some unwanted elements around it with the clone stamp tool. After that, I add shadows underneath his head and also fix the color since he had way too much yellow going on. Then I'll add blood to his face since a severed head tends to come with some blood. Well, a lot actually. Now, I use Blend If to make it feel more realistic and also desaturate him overall, which got me thinking, does a dead beaver go pale too when they die? Let me know in the comments. The selection around his head wasn't clean enough, so I grabbed one of my own hairbrushes and go around the edges to soften the cuts, since he's still got fur, being a beaver and all. Next, I take a piece of his forehead and drag it over both his eyes to act as eyelids and drop the opacity and erase the parts I don't need to get the shapes right. Once that is in place, I add shading to the eyelids and the floor beneath him. Then I'll grab another image of Hoppers and cut out just his arm, which is going to hang out of the garbage bag. Damn, this person really hated the idea of Hoppers. Anyways, once I've got the angle right, I add shading to the back from where the arm's emerging, and then I shade the arm itself too. After that, I add blood onto the arm coming from the inside of the bag, just enough to suggest something is not right in there. Then I thought it was a good idea to also take a leg, set it into the right perspective and place it hanging off the edge of the bag, and with the use of puppet warp, I'll make it look like it's genuinely coming from the inside. Then I'll drop the opacity, erase parts of the leg I don't need and add shading to the leg in the bag. And you guessed it, also blood. Now, I've had my fair share of horrific ideas in the past, but this one is probably the nastiest. I cut an open hole straight into the back and make the area around it bloody. Then I'll use Blend If again to bring some highlights back. Now, I'll add blood on the floor as well, coming from the head. And this is where the hole comes into play because blood is squirting out of that hole, meaning the rest of his body is probably in there. And once I'm somewhat happy with that, I add shading to it and bring in the studio idea from Charlie Anderson, who used this idea to go on set and kidnap Hoppers. Now, I'll place it coming out of the garbage bag too, erasing parts so it genuinely looks like it's coming from the inside. Finally, I place the script down on the floor since it's basically dying alongside Hoppers. I set it into the right perspective, make it look like blood is soaking through the paper, and finish it off with shadows underneath. Lastly, I remove the original text so I can replace it with the logo. Once the logo is placed, I swap in our own line that says, "This is garbage." Then a final camera raw filter, and here's the horror version of Hoppers if they had a Psycho fan. Again, you can find my free Photoshop assets in the description. Now, my favorite is definitely Finding Nemo. The design process was fun and I like how it turned out. Let me know which one was your favorite, and if you like this video, you'll probably like this video too.